What up, guys? Welcome to the Jiu-Jitsu podcast, episode whatever it is, with David Avellan. David Avellan is he's a fantastic grappler, a world-class grappler, competed in the ADCC, all that stuff. And he was someone, I think it was funny. I met him for the first time. We'll talk about this a little bit, but I figured I'd go into more detail here. We met each other for the first time. He came into one of my beginner classes, and he just sort of jumped on that. This is 2009. I was teaching under my coach, and come up to him like, "Hey man, nice to meet you." He already had no-gi gear on, so I was like, he must train. I'm like, "Hey man, nice to meet you," whatever. And I wasn't really like a good enough coach at like asking specific questions. So I was just like, "Hey, what's your name?" And David. And okay, cool, man. And I didn't really ask him anything else, because usually I would kind of let people tell me that they trained opposed to, but he didn't. He was just like, "Oh, my name's David. I'm here for class." Okay. So we're doing like, shuffling our feet around. We're doing shrimps. This is 2009, doing a really basic beginner white belt class. He's just going along for the ride.
That's awesome.
And then my coach sees him and he's like, "That's David Avellan," like from the, FFA. Him and his brother were well known at the time for their gym. So we talk with each other, and we end up having several great training sessions. I really enjoyed rolling with him. And I remember that one of the days we trained, I've got a picture of it somewhere on the internet. I had on a pair of Valley Tuda shorts, and then I had on this t-shirt that my coach had given me. He thought it was funny. It was a t-shirt, and it had this cat with like a handbag, and it said like purplish color letters, says "Let's go shopping." And that was my, I used to wear that shirt all the time. It was like one of my training outfits.
Okay.
Would be these Valley Tuda shorts. So short shorts with a big bright purpley sort of shirt that says "Let's go shopping." I just thought it was funny because you'd be in this room full of really tough dudes, and then you have this shirt. I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
And so anyway, had a great time training with him. And since then we've always been acquaintances. And anytime I run across him, I always like chatting with him, because I think he has an interesting perspective on things and interesting thought process on things.
Yep.
And when we had the podcast, one of the things sort of that I take away from this podcast is that, again, it's a lesson you could think about. I think this is a lesson I got from jiu-jitsu that I think you can translate over to anything in your life. Whatever, is basically every one of us is dealt a hand, right? Everybody gets dealt a hand. It's not about, I was talking with my wife about this the other day, right? Like, I'm not proud that I'm American. I'm happy that I'm American, but I'm not proud of it. I didn't do anything to whatever, it's like, like we were driving, and we'll see like something that says proud of this, proud of that, right? Like I can't be proud of my skin color. I can't be proud because I've seen like black pride, white pride, all that. Like, how can I be proud? I didn't do anything to earn this. Like being American, I didn't be like, if you were maybe came from another country and you had to fight your way to get here, maybe I would be proud, but I was born here. Like by luck of the draw, I got born in like a solid country, and been, given certain privileges because of it. I'm not proud of it, but I'm like freaking happy I had it. But I am proud of the things that I've done.
Okay.
And I think that, it's one of those things where everyone is dealt a hand, and everybody's going to have a different ceiling based on that hand. Because again, you can be anything you want to be, kind of, right? But there's a limit to it, no matter what, right? Where you come from, the experiences you've had. I mean, if you're, like you or me, no matter how good we were at, say, football, we would never play in the NFL. We're literally just not built for it. Genetics just is what it is. Wouldn't be a good use of our hand. And so I think that, one of the things listening to this podcast that I took away is, again, was a really well use of the hand that he was dealt. You're going to listen to a guy basically him and his brother are starting a gym when they're teenagers. Neither one of them have a coach they don't really have a coach very long in their jiu-jitsu. It's like bits and pieces, right? And you're piecing this together, and you're having to find other ways to improve. But the way they played their hand they played it really well. And he played his hand very well, and reached a very high level of grappling. And so I think for all of us, right, when it comes to our technical choice of moves, when it comes to the things that we get into, the sports we get into, the way that we choose to attack life, so to speak, it all kind of comes back to that, right? Where everyone's dealt a hand, and it's how you play your hand that matters. Yeah. Not necessarily that you get the belt, you get the best hand, because some people are dealt really great hands and they fold. Yep. Right. Some people dealt really shitty hands, and they learn how to play them really well. And that's the game, right? It's like we're all playing that card game, and it's how we play it. And we're lucky if we get an ace or two in there, but a lot of times you don't. You still got to play. So anyway, that's the idea. As we get into this, hope you guys enjoy the podcast, pick up a couple ideas to chew on, both from David's experiences in grappling, but also too, he shares some of his methodology for training and developing your own style and system for jiu-jitsu. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make this podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. If you guys have never tried CBD, if you've tried CBD from a other company, I always encourage people to try a product from Charlotte's Web and see what kind of difference it makes for you. For me, I've been using their products for a number of years because I've tried other CBD products years ago. And I noticed that there was always this, sometimes I noticed a difference, sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I felt like I was literally buzzed, like there was something else in there besides CBD. And sometimes it's like I felt nothing. Charlotte's Web is third-party tested. So, they know exactly what's in those bottles and those gummies and everything else that they have. And, it's a very consistent product. I like taking mine, as me and Dave will talk about with Eugene here. We're all basically either close to 40 or over 40. Recovery is a big thing that you get really focused on. And again, there is no supplement or any way to work around the importance of diet, sleep, exercise, and proper exercise and all the normal stuff. But assuming you have those things down, then that's where supplements come into the mix, and you can move the needle a couple percentage points. And I personally think I get that from CBD, both mostly from a recovery standpoint. And so if you guys want to check it out, go to charlottesweb.com, check out the different products that they have. If you find something you like, the promo code to use is Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order. And you can get whatever products they might have, including one of their newer products, which is a CBN product. CBN is mainly sort of, I guess, their thought processes or their thinking is that it seems to help support sleep. So you can try it out and see what you think about it. And again, you can do that at charlottesweb.com. Also, thanks to Epic Roll for supporting the podcast. Epic Roll is a jiu-jitsu brand company, merch, gear, everything else that supports a lot of small, I don't want to say smaller, but a lot of up and coming athletes. We'll say it this way: people that either you'll know on some level or you're going to get to know more and more of later on. It's also who I get my rash guards and gis, or my rash guards and shorts made through right now. I have a new design coming out. I'm waiting to receive the prototypes. I think they look slick. Here, I'll show them to you real quick, Eugene.
They're awesome.
Well,
is that the one you wore?
Well, no. So, that's the one I wore, but I also got a new one. I'm not going to show you guys, but I'll show you.
You came in wearing...
but you can give your reaction. So those are the shorts. Let me go up a little bit higher. Here we go. Yeah. So those are the ranked ones. So we'll have like blue, purple, the whole thing.
Oh, heck yeah!
I think they look cool.
Those are awesome.
I think they look great.
Those are awesome.
So I think I'm really excited about them.
We should show them on here real quick so make people watch it on the YouTubes.
Okay, so
you already do it. All right. Here,
well, no, I mean, I don't. You're going to be going to zoom in on this thing. So no, we don't have to zoom in. It's fine. So okay, there we go. And so it's simple, but something going on. We'll have those released in the near future. And I like to, anytime I do a big like pre-sale of that kind of stuff, I like to do a couple of free bonuses. So there'll be some bonuses included with that, which I think is fun. More on that later. But again, if you guys want to check out their website for any gear that they may have currently that isn't my stuff, or if you're listening to this long into the future from August of 2024, then you can go to epicrollbjj.com. And the promo code is Chewjitsu20 to save 20% off your order on whatever you buy at checkout. Also, guys, if you want to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. When you join, obviously, you guys know how this works. Patreon is not a brand new thing. You understand it. Basically, you are giving us a few bucks, and in return, it supports the podcast. You get a few perks, like a library of content that we've assembled that has everything from warm-up routines that are specifically tailored to jiu-jitsu people. Also, too, we have things like recordings from seminars that I've done, special videos that I've never released on YouTube, and we also have a guest feature from each one of our podcast guests. We had included David, where we take a little bit of the podcast that we think maybe gives you an idea to chew on or some actionable tip that could be useful to you, and we put it into the Patreon for you to access. And again, the amount of money that you'll pay versus how much you get is pretty crazy when you're considering the staggering amount of content, which again isn't necessarily a good thing because most people get overwhelmed by stuff. But again, if you just get in there and you just say, you know what, I'm going to use this as I'm going to listen to these different clips periodically over the course of, say months, instead of scrolling on your phone and just, basically being fed potato chips. You can listen to specific stuff on jiu-jitsu. It could be useful to you. So anyway, that's an idea for you. If you guys want to support the podcast and get access to the Patreon, patreon.com/the Chewjitsu podcast. And you can join up there. Also, guys, if you want to get my daily email and join the thousands that read it every day, which goes into everything from jiu-jitsu related ideas to just about anything. I was also doing I did an email yesterday on the Olympic shooter meme.
Yeah, the guy from Turkey.
Yeah, I thought everybody got the message wrong. Because it's like, you know how they had the two people separated side by side, and they'd say like, they'd have all this complex stuff and then it would be like something simple.
Right.
To me, they got it wrong. Because it's like, because, we'll talk about this at the end. I'll tell you why they got it wrong.
Okay.
At the end of the show,
All
I'll
right.
tell you guys why I think most people got the Olympic shooter meme wrong. And we'll talk about that. But anyway, you can get my email at chujitsu.net/join, JOIN. When you join up, I'll give you a couple free ebooks that have some great ideas. One of which is a drilling ebook, which goes into some ideas which David talks about on the podcast, which again, not that it's unheard of, but it's some stuff that he talked about, which is something that I've used a bunch and had the same effect that he had, where you start to develop your own game. If you want to get access to it, chujitsu.net/join, jump on it, get it. And guys, with that said, let's jump into this podcast with David and talk about his experiences with jiu-jitsu and also get some great ideas from training. Dave, for anybody that's listening and maybe doesn't know, how did you get your start with, I know you said you did JKD first, but how did you get your start with jiu-jitsu, grappling, and MMA and all that stuff back in the day in the 90s when it was so hard to find and it wasn't necessarily easily available?
Yeah, so I actually got into, Jeet Kune Do just from self-defense purposes. Like my brother and I were I was just entering high school as a freshman. And my whole life I dealt with bullying because I was a shy kid. I was 130 pounds in third grade. So I was pretty hefty.
Yeah.
And I would always get into one fight every school year, and pretty much I would win that fight, and then nobody would mess with me until the
Yeah,
next
you had your
year.
reputation for the year.
Yeah, and then every year was like that, Um, but when we got into high school, fights started getting a little more serious, and we saw a kid get just massacred. He was like 4 essentially grown men who were like football players beating up on one little kid, and the whole school was watching, teachers, nobody intervened. Kid got knocked out, and, he was full seizure mode on the floor, right? And my brother and I looked at each other like, "Man, this could be us," like, "We gotta learn how to fight." And, the first thing we found back then, we saw UFCs and all that, but, we didn't really know how to find jujitsu or anything like that. So we thought, well, let's learn like Bruce Lee, right? And we got into Jeet Kune Do that way. And we were watching UFCs as this was going on, and all the Jeet Kune Do fighters are losing. It's like, oh, this is kind of a bummer. And I think it culminated where my brother actually got challenged by his then girlfriend, who was a Taekwondo black belt, to go spar at their gym, and he got humiliated, like pretty bad. He got step sidekicked by like a 50-year-old, launched into a wall, and then he slid down the wall like a cartoon, and a painting fell on top of him afterwards. So
Oh, that's great.
he's like, after that, we're done with Jeet Kune Do, and we only did about like a year and a half of it, and then my brother got into wrestling shortly afterwards, and from wrestling, he had 2 years of wrestling. I had 3. My brother's older than me. And when he finished, right away, he started getting into NHB. He found a guy named Randy Ibarra, who's not famous or anything like that, but at the time, he was a judo black belt, Japanese jiu-jitsu black belt, Taekwondo black belt. He was training boxing, and he had done seminars under Hickson Gracie, and this is in the 90s, right? Early. So he was already doing MMA before it even existed. And my brother, he went knee deep into it early while I was still wrestling. And he's like, "Dave, you got to do this," But I was still chasing my dream of becoming a state champion, right? So I'm like, man, I don't have time for that BS. I'm a wrestler right now. And then my brother's like, "Just wrestle with me." I'm like, "Okay." And my brother rear naked choked me a bunch of times and armbarred me. I was like, all right, it's all right. Once I'm done wrestling, I'm gonna learn how to do this because I can't stand for my brother like just ragdolling me like that. And as soon as I finished my wrestling career, jumped right into doing NHB. And the very first day of training, heel hooks, neck cranks, ground and pound. Right. So like this is like 99. So I feel like a lot of my brother and I's early success was just because our coach, Randy, was way ahead of the curve. He was doing MMA before anybody had even really thought of it. So like in our leg lock game, even though like by today's standard was so basic, like not even a white belt would be doing the type of leg locks that we were doing.
Mhm.
It was just way ahead of everybody else who it was forbidden in jiu-jitsu.
What about like was the goal for you guys to fight? Is that what you wanted to do? I mean, obviously initially it was to defend yourself. And so wrestling is honestly, an excellent way to do that. But then getting to the no holds barred or MMA, what was the intention or the goal, just to learn how to fight, or did you guys have plans of actually like fighting, professionally or for money or anything like that?
Just like any other hobby, it kind of gets out of control.
Yeah.
And it's definitely like it went onto an obsession side. Initially, when we did Jikundo, it was about a self-defense type thing. And then we started having fun with it. I think we got phase two or whatnot. But then once we switched into wrestling, we were both very competitive.
Mhm.
So by being in a sport, now we're competing a lot. And I found early success and I got hooked onto it, right? And my brother, he actually had suffered 11 losses in a row on the opening of his career because unfortunately for him, our team was very small. He was starting as varsity. And
Mm.
then South Florida at the time, very competitive division. So he was just getting murked. It's like being a white belt and then you go, oh, you're going to compete for your team under the black belt division.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's like you're just getting smoked. So my brother, for me, is a role model in that sense that he was so mentally resilient because you can imagine you're like a 15-year-old kid in high school, you have your girlfriend there and all your friends, and you have to tell them, I lost, I lost, I lost, I lost, I lost, I lost, I lost. It's hard to even do it,
Yeah.
right? And my family wasn't that supportive of him. Like my grandparents, like, oh, you should quit that. You don't have any talent. Get out of there.
Yeah.
And he just kept on it. And he got his first win, and he's like, now everything's gonna change for me. And then he lost like 2 more times. But when he went into his senior year, he had a very good record. I think he went like 27-5 or whatnot. So like he turned it around.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think for him, and I know for me as well, wrestling is what made me a man. I feel like I learned work ethic. I learned discipline. I learned what it really meant to sacrifice something and like what it meant to be willing to even in my case, I'm kind of extreme. Like I'm willing to die for my sport, right? At least when I was in it, like deep.
Yeah.
So once we got into wrestling by year 2, I was a lifer, right? Like now this is my way of being. And when I found NHB and then ultimately what it became MMA as a channel for that, I'm like, oh, this is what I'm doing now. And, like
Mhm.
I can't separate myself from the martial arts at this point. It's one of who I am, So uh, getting into competition just became like a natural extension of it because as a young man, I feel like as a martial artist, you're always trying to prove yourself, right? And that's what competition is about. It's about proving, right? You have something in your ego that wants the world to know, like I am the best, or I stand for something, and I'm going to show you uh, what that is through my art form, right? And how I portray myself. So, especially in our case, I feel like we were always Ronin in a way. Like we were always on the outside. We were never in that cool guy circle. Like when I wrestled in high school, I was in a school that never filled the full varsity team. Right. In my senior year, there were 6 guys. And wrestling has a 14 man, at least when I was wrestling, 14 men. So we always lost every dual meet.
Mhm.
We would win our matches because the guys who were in there were very well conditioned and good, but we would always lose by default just because everybody else was forfeit. And when I trained with Randy and started doing NHB, it was also, you know, he wasn't a BJJ black belt. He wasn't like internationally recognized or anything, you know, so nobody really knew who we came from. And when Randy moved away and then we essentially had to start our gym on our own, um, we didn't have any sensei. We didn't have a master. So at that point, we were literally Ronin. We were just, you know, two kids that had been training martial arts and wrestling for a few years. That how do you keep improving? Well, we just got to start ourselves and just start working with each other. So we definitely had a lot to prove. I could sympathize with the Gracie approach of beating people up because to the simple mind like I started with, that was the only way thing I could think of. Like, how do we prove to people that what we do works? Well, we have to go out there and show it.
Yeah. It's kind of, you know, I guess you could consider like a dramatic demonstration. You know, like a lot of times, say, if you in marketing, right, they'll talk about that idea where, you know, they'll try to have a dramatic demonstration. You can think of some silly towel or something that's being sold in an infomercial. They'll throw a bunch of crap in there and they'll swipe it up like, look, it got all the crap up and you can buy this towel for $19.95 or whatever. Well, you know, because people didn't know what jiu-jitsu and grappling was, because we always associated martial arts with stand-up, karate, punching, kicking, whatever. You know, you needed something dramatic to really get people's attention to say, oh, wow, you know. And then now that everybody kind of buys into it, you don't have to necessarily sell it as hard, right? You can be like, you already know this stuff works. Now you just need to find the gym that you like and the training facility that you like. I'm curious about what it's like during the early 2000s, because I remember seeing pretty early on, like when I got started in 2003, I remember like seeing like, you know, FFA. You know, at that point, I already saw the gym name around. I remember seeing like, I was under a guy at the time that was under Pablo Popovich, and I remember him and Marcus, they would battle it out and stuff down there in Florida. What was that like for you guys being out there? Because like you said, you don't have a sensei, you don't have this lineage to draw on that a lot of people will pull from and a lot of jiu-jitsu guys sort of look for. And you guys are running this gym on your own in the early 2000s when it's still very, very niche. What was that like for you guys?
It was rough because, mind you, we opened this gym on when I started college as a freshman, right? So I was 18, no business acumen whatsoever, no business plan, no real capital to really start a business. Most of it was on credit card debt. And like you said, back then, the UFC was in the underground. It was in the dark ages. It wasn't being promoted like a big sport.
What
They
year
had
did you
to,
guys start your gym?
2001.
Okay, yeah, so that's like still that's before Zuffa. That's still like that's the dark days of MMA when it almost fizzled out in America.
Yeah, that's when
Yeah.
essentially McCain had a hand in shutting down the UFC,
Yeah.
and they had to restructure in order to get because a lot of guys still don't realize that like as you were saying, early UFCs was a different model altogether. It was more
Yes.
about style versus style,
Mhm.
and because that the debate hadn't been settled yet of which style was the best, and also they were no time limits, no weight classes. You know, you could pull hair and stuff
You
and
could
hit the
strike the
groin.
groin. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
Joe versus Keith Hackney. I mean, he's
Oh,
just
yeah, that's a
hammering it.
classic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it was a very different time, you know? And, so when we started in 2001, nobody even knew what the UFC was. Like, you would have to be a hardcore to know it. So, you nowadays, people can come in and like, "Oh, what do you guys do?" It's like, "Have you seen the UFC?" It's like, "Oh, yeah, of course." Okay, like that. Back then, that's when I was telling you earlier, like, I had to say, "Well, have you seen kickboxing and wrestling kind of mix them together?
Yeah.
Come into my guard." And you're like, "Oh, what's this?" You
Yeah.
know?
What am I
Right.
doing?
Right. So very difficult. And not to mention that, as you put it, that we didn't have a master, right? It was just my brother and I. And the internet, for all of its faults, has been such a godsend to people in the era where they can just get any information they want through the internet.
Mhm.
Back then, it wasn't the case. So, like for my brother and I, we when we competed, it was also our time to learn because we were filming. We filmed all of our matches and we studied all of our competitors because we would learn from them and from our mistakes and then improve.
Mhm.
So a lot of our development was essentially reinventing the wheel, right? And I see that there's pros and cons to that. On the pro side, you develop a more inquisitive mind, and you also understand the fundamentals better, because it's easy if I give you a wrench, now you just use it and it works. But when you had to make the wrench yourself, you understand, well, if I get at the end of the lever, I'm going to get a lot more torque on this thing and be able to use it better, right? And so my brother and I having to reinvent a lot of things, uh, definitely understand at a more core level how things work. And I think also we also had the southpaw approach, which is when we were coming up, everything we did was different from everyone else,
Mm.
right? Because we didn't follow a system like everyone else did. So, like I said, our leg lock game was considered advanced because we were doing things other people didn't do. And then because of our wrestling background, our wrestling game was well above a lot of people just because no one was wrestling.
Mm.
And we would come up with different techniques and guard passes that most people weren't using because we were coming out of the box. Like I was doing knee cut passing very early in, cartwheel passing, lots of funky stuff that most people weren't really messing with, because I even though I don't do Jeet Kune Do anymore, I still follow the philosophy the entire time, which is I don't care where the move comes from. If it
Mhm.
works, we're going to use it.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the early problems with Jiu-Jitsu, which is like they didn't want to use leg locks because it was taboo, right? Or they wouldn't want to use wrestling techniques because, oh, that's wrestling. We don't do wrestling. We do Jiu-Jitsu. And to me, it's like, if you can show me a move from a pro wrestling video game that works, I'll do it. I don't
Yeah.
have any qualms about it. And I say that because I had a student that would do just that. He loved Japanese pro wrestling video games, and he would come up to me in open mats. He's like, "Hey, I saw this move in a game." I'm like, "All right, come on, Jimmy, show me what it is." And like they worked. I had a
Yeah.
couple of them. I would take down like D1 wrestlers with him. I'm like, "Hey, man, this thing works."
If
Like
it works, it works.
if it
That's kind of
works,
the
it
old
works.
school, like you'll see on YouTube now. Students will come in, like I saw this move on YouTube, some crazy move, and they'll start trying to use it. And it's kind of the same thing. So you didn't have YouTube to pull from back in the day.
No, grappling magazines, VHS tapes, and like
Yeah.
mini eights, just recording. And that would be the way around. And, in South Florida, which right now is like a mecca for jiu-jitsu, but back then, you only had a few real big names of the game. Popovich was obviously one of them there. Then you had what used to be Silvera Brothers, that was Conan and Marcus, uh, his brother Brutus, right? And
Yeah.
then they became American Top Team, right?
Mhm.
And ATT kind of swallowed up everybody for a bit. And at the time, my brother and I, one of the early ways that we kind of raised capital was by doing grappling tournaments.
Mm.
Like my brother and I actually started the no-gi grappling scene in South Florida. We've teamed up with Naga, with Kip Kohler, who's always been super cool with us. And like was like, we'll use your rule set. We'll put the Naga thing. He just helped us out a little bit with the marketing, and he's always been a stand-up dude. So we did like 8 grappling tournaments there, and which is also much respect to anybody who runs tournaments. It's such a challenging thing to do. A lot of people like to crap on the referees and the judges, and my brother and I did it all. We refed all the matches. We had to coordinate the tournaments. In the era where there was no internet, you have to mail flyers and stuff like
Yeah.
that, right? So it's very challenging to do all that.
No electronic registration, right? Everything had to be done
No
paper
safe
and
comp
pen.
or anything like that.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
You have
That's
sandbaggers. You're like, you get the hell out of here, dude. Like, I've seen you win this twice already. So there was no database where you could compare people from,
that's
right?
right.
But competing against like ATT was like a rival of ours when we were starting up, because like they used to be Silvera Brothers, and then when they became ATT, at one point they tried to recruit us, and we had went to their gym because they did. I remember in particular it was the event, like they actually tried twice, right? Like when we first started at a gym, they invited us to come over, but the vibe in Silvera Brothers was really rough at the time. It was kind of like it felt like I was walking into like a gang
Mm.
territory, you know? And mind you, my brother and I, 18, 19, and it's a bunch of 30-year-old dudes all covered in tattoos and just like mean mugging you the whole time. And, we roll with them. I wasn't really like impressed by anybody. And I'm like, man, I already did this in high school, I don't need to have to like look over my shoulder and I get shanked by somebody. So we kept on our own thing. When they became ATT, it kind of whitewashed a little bit. Like they became a lot more pleasant. And we got invited again, and I rolled with them. And the one role that I had that was a really good role was Laborio, Ricardo, obviously. So
Oh yeah.
I didn't realize the dude's a tank.
He's a tank.
He was the Steve Martin of jiu-jitsu, but yeah,
that's right. He's turned into this, like, if you meet him now, I mean, like, it's funny to hear people who knew him back and he was like, he used to be crazy. He was a hard competitor, super tough and intense. And then now he's like this fatherly old grandpa kind of guy who like knows more jiu-jitsu than you'll ever forget. And he's like, so like nice, you know what I mean? But I remember some of the guys were talking about, like, he'd ride up on his Harley or his motorcycle, and you're like, oh man, like Laborio's here.
Run out the gym. Yeah.
But you guys stayed on your own though.
We stayed on our own, and we would be competing with them. And just like in our wrestling days, we were always outgunned, outnumbered. Right? We never had, because ATT at that time had swallowed up all the other schools in the area, basically. Like Popovich became an affiliate with them for a period of time and all that. So like we would never be able to win because we didn't have the numbers to beat them, but it was always a rivalry. And then when we would fight MMA against them and stuff, it was always there was a lot of bad blood earlier on. I think like now it's not really there anymore. Like our gym isn't really that much into competing at that scale. Like we don't have the numbers for sure at this point. But it's always made it fun. Like I said, I've always felt I was an underdog, right? I never felt like I was accepted in those early days. Like it was always fighting for respect, fighting for that approval. Like I said, I feel that's pretty much every competitor. And if you have that underdog mentality and you're pushed into that corner, I feel like it helps you, right? Because it's kind of feeling that idea that you have, and it's making you want to prove yourself that much more.
Have you guys, obviously being a smaller gym and not having a lot of experience, not a lot of lineage, was there any times that you guys had to kind of consider closing or stopping what you're doing, giving up on your dreams? Or do you think kind of being the underdog was just kind of, you knew that was part of the process?
There was definitely some rough times. So I would say we opened in November 2001. And mind you, our opening was, my brother was running a club out of his girlfriend's gym at the time. And we had like 12 people. I'm like, oh,
that's pretty good it's pretty good to start off with. That ain't bad.
So that's what we can start off with on this strip mall next to an anchor store, like a Publix,
Yeah.
The overhead's like really high. And again, my parents, God bless them, they're so supportive, like letting their, teenage kids try to run this endeavor, but after about like 4 or 5 months, there was a period of time, I think, I forget the month, it might have been April or February, but no one showed up to the gym the whole month. No phone calls, no emails.
Whoa.
It's just my brother and I walking in there and then walking out.
Like you had no students were in the space at all.
It's like no new students, right?
No
it was just stagnating, right? You can tell, like you can smell death in the air. Right? And my brother and I would just go to sleep, and we both had the same thought process. It's like, how is this going to work? How are we going to make this work? And mind you, we're both going to university as engineers. I'm taking 15 credits, and so is he. So we're trying to balance, graduating from college while trying to run the business and competing at the same time. So it was just juggling a lot of things. So I always laugh when people talk about the college experience. It's like, the only college experience I had was this strife. I didn't have time to party or to do anything like that. I was taking my 15 credits, then I was training, then I was teaching, then I was stressing out over how the hell I'm going to pay the bills.
Yeah.
So it was rough. And fortunately, we had old partners in Mike Cardoso and Efren Ruiz, Elian Rodriguez, who they had their own gym called Extreme Jiu-Jitsu at the time. And we were training a lot with each other because they also were Ronin. Like Mike was a blue belt. I think Efren was a purple belt. and they had no master, right? They were just kind of stuck there, and they were kind of put in a weird position where nobody wanted to promote them or whatnot. So they eventually merged with us, and they had brought their student base into ours, which kind of revitalized the program a little bit. And but it wasn't until my brother met Lloyd Irvin that
Mm.
everything changed. Right, like he is the guy that made us successful. Right, he showed us the way. So yeah, and there was a point like 2.5 years, or it must have been around 3 years out. 'Cause I just finished college, I graduated,
Mhm.
and I found a job at a nuclear power plant almost by accident. And I told my brother, "Look, I with the money I make from this, I can start paying off the debt, but you have to figure out how to make this gym work." Right? So he just went through a divorce, was not in the greatest mental state, you know. He, and he was doing the ADCC qualifier in Canada and bumped into Lloyd. He won the qualifier, right? And then Lloyd saw him and said, "Look, what are you doing?" And gave him like a reality check and gave him an invitation to come to his gym in Camp Springs and just shadow him for a week.
Mhm.
That was it. And my brother was already very low, so he's like, "What do I got to lose?" And he made the trip, came back, and like a month and a half later, the gym was profitable.
Mm.
You
And
know,
so, and
so
so Lloyd showed him the ways to actually run a business, so
correct.
that you could actually support yourself and your students and everything else.
Yes, Lloyd had. He is very analytical, very systems based, and that works with me because as an engineer, I feel everything works in systems. That's why Kimura Trap System, all that stuff, right? Everything to me is a system. So like he had the business systematized, lead generation, the sales process, how to teach, just the whole administration of running your staff and whatnot. And in just a week, my brother was able to pick up the basic nuggets, right? Like that 80% of you will just how to get things cleaned up and that started that relationship where Lloyd mentored my brother and into learning how to do everything more better with the gym. So uh, yeah, you just can't head kick everybody and expect
Mm,
to become a profitable business.
that's
As
right.
it really turns out. So and it made everything so much better as far as the teaching quality concerned because then we made curriculums and all the curriculums were fixed and we still do them the monthly curriculums where uh, everything gets just so much better when you have a system and you're not just winging it, right? And like
Mm.
to this day, like I don't teach a class if I haven't written it down first, right? I'm just not going to show up to the gym like, oh, let me look at my phone real quick. Oh, that looks cool. All right, let's do that.
Yeah.
Like that's being lazy, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to show up to work unprepared. Just like I'm not going to show up to a class unprepared. I don't even like doing privates like that. Like if someone asks me for a private lesson, I'm like, tell me, what do you want to learn? 'Cause I'm
Mhm.
gonna write you a lesson plan. I'm not just gonna show up and just teach off the top of my head. That's wasting each other's time.
Is that like so the main thing that you saw was or was it the systems approach? Was that the main thing that you kind of saw your brother implement, or was there anything specific? Maybe his first when you first saw him back in the gym after being with Lloyd, what did you notice that he started to do? Maybe what's one thing that stood out to you that he did differently or change his approach on?
Definitely, so it's systems, but the easier things to see are like phone scripts, right?
Mm.
Rather than just letting people pick up the phone and answer however they want, you know, it's a super fantastic day at the Freestyle Fighting Academy. How can I help you? Right? Like now everybody's saying that. And that's like it sounds kind of corny, but it's very disarming, right? Because you're already okay, like this is friendly, maybe overly friendly, but
Right, especially for someone, as you said, who's not a hardcore person, who's already nervous about calling you up. They're already sweating bullets to even contact this gym
Yeah.
because in their mind, what they think is going to happen is that you guys are going to beat the snot out of them, and when they call, it's going to be like, "What do you want?" That's what they're
yes.
expecting. So even
See.
if you maybe go a little bit over the top, like you said, it has a disarming quality because it's like, oh, cool, these people they're being overly nice. It's like when you go to like Chick-fil-A and they say, how am I, like, it's my pleasure to serve you or
Right.
whatever. It's a
Yes.
little over the top, but it still leaves you with a better experience
Sure.
than
Yeah.
like the guy at a fast food place is like, what do you want? That kind of
Yes,
thing. So
absolutely. And it's just being more pleasant, right? Like you
mhm.
said, like in something like this, a lot of people's fear is that they're going to get into a cage match. And it's like, no, no, like you're not getting anywhere near that level, right? And that's the other thing we learned, right? Like you can't teach everybody the same way. And just from a basic marketing principle, you can't market to everybody the same way, right? Like the way I'm going to market to a 4-year-old is going to be very different than to the 19-year-old who has aspirations to be a UFC champion, right? And understanding where the real audience is, right? Like who's paying the majority of the bills? Because I can tell you, it's not the fighters. The
Mhm.
fighters are more of a time drain than anything else, if we're being
That's right.
honest. But it's more of a passion project, right? Like, of
Sure.
course, you want to. These are the guys that are actually putting boots in the ground, right? So, of course, we love having them around. But if your gym consists purely of fighters, man, you got a lot of drama.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, a lot of drama because to be a fighter, it's like I always think about this, like, and I've said this before. It's almost like guys that are fighters, and that's what they're focused on 100%. They're still in like sort of a feral human stage. You know what I mean? They're just wild. And like there's so like I said, there's so much drama and it's all crazy. Um, but at the same time, having those fighters injects a little bit of vitality into the gym. It's where it's like there's some excitement because these guys are fighting, but at the same time, you can't your business can't depend on them.
No, and like you said, I've always, I mean, I don't have a actual stat on this, but just from experience,
Yeah.
most fighters have daddy issues, right? And
Mm.
when I look at a lot of the fighters that raced the year, most of them didn't have a father,
Uh-huh.
or it was a very weak uh, parental influence,
Yeah.
right? There's some exceptions, like myself. My dad's been super fantastic and supportive, but and I have a couple guys, but a lot of them don't, and it makes sense, right? Because most people, why do they bring their kids to the martial arts? They need discipline, right? And normally, discipline is dished out by dad,
Right.
right? And
Dads and fathers, they typically, the masculine holds the boundaries. And obviously if you were going to, if you look at if you have your mother and your father sitting next to each other, the person that's going to be the more threatening of the two, more cases than not, is going to be the father, right?
yeah,
So therefore they hold the boundary. They're the ones that say, this is how it's going to be.
right. But if you're a kid, then you're getting bullied around and whatnot for whatever reason. Like I guess the father, whether it was not there or just not able to transmit the message of how to stand up to
Mhm.
somebody, then you
Yep.
bring them to a martial arts school, right?
Mhm.
So the fighter, I feel, is like a more extreme case of that, right? Where then they had this ego, and that's what I was telling you. Like you're always trying to prove something, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like it comes from that innately, So uh, when you have a gym full of that, of course, there's going to be lots of drama because two people are going to clash into each other, and then it becomes fireworks. So when you're trying to run a gym, there, like you said, it is true that primal energy is great because it kind of rubs off on other people a little bit, which you want a little bit of that in you.
Mhm.
But if there's too much of it, it's going to start scaring people off, or it's going to be piss some people off, right?
Yep.
When a fighter goes too rough on a guy who's not ready for it. So for a successful gym, I feel like one of the main things is a good culture, and you have to be able to balance all these different types of people. I mean, you've been in the game for quite a while, or both of you have really. So like you can go into a gym and you can sense when there's bad culture and versus a good culture, right? Where like
Yeah.
bad culture, like if someone sees you wearing an ankle brace, you're like, oh, I'm gonna catch that ankle. Right? It's like, it's like, what's wrong with you, right? Like you're like looking for weakness in somebody, like, all right,
Yeah.
we're gonna get that. Versus, having a good culture is like, okay, I'll take it easy on that guy. He's first day here, or
Right.
there's
Yeah.
people I can go hard with, and there's people I play with, right? I feel like I get a lot of questions that I'm here in Vegas, right? And like people like, oh, where should you train? I'm like, dude, like everybody here is great, right? Like, you have like Renato Canuto, you have Drysdale, you have the guys at Extreme, you got the 10th Planet guys with Andy Varela and all that. Like, there's so many great guys.
Mhm.
So the only advice I would give you, just go to a place where you feel comfortable.
Find your
'Cause-
place.
yeah, because if you're not comfortable, you're not going to stick around.
That's
Right?
right.
It doesn't matter how good the guy is, right? The coach could be amazing, but if you don't vibe with him, you're
Mhm.
just not gonna stick around, and then it's a net loss, right? So, like, just go check out the gym, see who you feel like you fit in the most, and that's probably gonna be the best bet. because as far
Yeah.
as skill level here, right, and I think nowadays that's pretty true, at least in the big city areas. Like there's so much talent here that it's going to be hard to find a place that you're not going to learn enough technique to get some proficiency, right?
Mhm.
It's more about how comfortable are you going there and how accepted do you feel.
Yeah. Going back to like, because obviously you've been training for a long time, been teaching for a long time. Going back to looking at like say the early days within the first handful of years or whatever, what are some mistakes that you guys made with your training methodology? Or maybe if you look back at it knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would maybe do differently or instruct your old self to do differently in order to get more from yourself in those early days?
Great question. Because it'd be a lot of things.
A lot of things, right? Because we all messed up on a lot of things,
For
I know that,
sure.
just off top, I know that, like, at least for my sake, most people train really, really hard
Yeah.
all the time, and we grounded ourselves down to the nub. And if we ran into a problem, instead of like trying to like learn like a more technical way through it, we just said, let's go harder, and that'll be our sort of catch all for everything.
Yes. So I would say when I came out of wrestling, you remember the archetype for being a godlike wrestler was Dan Gable,
Yeah.
right? And Dan Gable, I'm going to train until I have to be carried off the mats, right?
Mhm.
And he won his gold medal, he won the world championship, and then he kind of retired into the sunset, right? And that's what's the story most people have, which is great, except like he got a bunch of spinal fusions and became pretty much physically disabled,
Yeah.
after, just a short wrestling career, really. Right.
That's
So,
that's the after that they don't see, right? They
yes.
see the nice story, then they think it's happily ever after, and it's like, well, not exactly.
I mean, mind you, he became one of the most successful college coaches in history, which
Sure.
is wonderful, right? He's a winner. He's gonna find a way to win. But I'm sure he would have liked to have been able to continue to wrestle, right? Or to have the physical capabilities. I know I would, right? But I say that because I followed that example, and you know, we were trained to, when you hear that voice in your head goes, "Hey, maybe you should take it easy." I'm like, "Oh, stop being a pussy. Push through."
Mhm.
Right? And it's usually a little later you get injured, right? Like nobody gets hurt in the beginning of practice. You get hurt at the end of practice.
One
Why?
more
You're
round.
fatigued, you're tired, and you're starting to try to force yourself to do things that your
Yeah.
body doesn't want to do, and then you get hurt. So as far as things that I could have done better, one, as you said, realizing that you don't have to prove your toughness every day, right? And I feel there's certain times of training where your toughness is important to develop, right? You don't want to be fighting your first war in the cage,
Mhm.
right? Because that's going to be a sink or swim type of moment for you. So if we could have some gym wars early in the career, that is good, because now you're going to be kind of tempered, right? Where you, if I'm tough once, I'm tough for the rest of my life, right? I don't have to be tough every day, because there's a fine line between toughness and stupidity, right? And I've walked all over that line, right? So I can tell you from firsthand experience, right?
Mm.
Once you're tough, it's not like, oh, I forgot what it means or how it is to be tough. So I don't have to show that every day. Now, in the beginning, that's why I keep saying early in the career, when you're a kid. Why? Because you recover faster, right? So if you do make the mistake and cross over to stupid line and get hurt, it's all right. You'll bounce back pretty fast. But when you're in your 30s and your 40s, you don't bounce back that quick. And
That's
if you
right.
cross that stupid line, man, you're costing yourself, 3, 6, maybe months, years, who knows? So uh, you also, from a training standpoint, if you're trying to prepare for a competition and you're getting hurt, you might lose that competition, right? That opportunity window. So, and just the other fact that we realize now, you know what? Like grinding yourself day in, day out is not optimal, right? Like you're not going to perform at your best.
Mhm.
It's kind of like, you remember the training mask when it was a big thing back in the
Oh,
day,
yeah.
which
They
is
took a gas
basically it was
mask and
just three
yeah.
holes, right? And people are
Uh-huh.
like, oh, by training this, you're going to develop some better conditioning. It's like, no, you
Yeah.
don't. Like you're just breathing through a straw.
Yeah.
That you're actually going to be training at less capacity because you don't have enough oxygen coming in. So
Right.
you're getting worse training. You might make the argument you're getting mentally tougher,
Yeah.
sure, but you're not getting better output. So you're getting inferior level of training. It's kind of like people who misunderstand altitude training,
Right.
right?
Well,
Like,
that's
oh,
really what that was, right? Like they
yeah,
thought
and
you're
that
not going
was
to
to
create
try
an
to,
adaptation through
That's
a
right.
gas mask.
yes, but like the not understanding the chemistry, the physics behind it, right? Because it's not the volume of air that you're breathing that changes your hemoglobin content. It is the density of the air.
Mhm.
So if I'm breathing through a straw or I'm breathing over the mouth, it's the same density. So it doesn't trigger any blood flow change, right? Or any change in your body's hemoglobin trying to suck in more iron and whatnot, oxygen rather. It's altitude and it's time. But if I go to altitude and train for an hour, I'm going to train worse because again, not enough oxygen in there. I'm not going to be able to perform that well. So the idea was you're supposed to train low, sleep high because it's a time function. So if I'm getting 8 hours at high altitude, that could trigger an adaptation in my blood.
Mhm.
But again, people who are with bro sciencing their way through things, just goofing up, right, and just making a mess of things. So, but now we know, you know what, like running on red line the whole time is not great. Like one of the other things I've learned, which is to me, like if I have, let's say, X amount of training volume that I plan to do this week,
Mhm.
the ideal way to spread it out in the primitive mind is evenly, right? Where it turns out that's actually a terrible idea because your body basically never recovers. It's
Mhm.
better to have like a hard day, then a light day, and then maybe a medium day, and then a hard day, and then a light day, right? So like when you have a rest day, you actually can rest, right? Whereas
Yep.
if you're just constantly at a steady state of exercise, your body never gets to relax, right? And you
Mhm.
never get to truly recover. And these are not things I learned until like maybe a couple years ago.
Right.
So, you know, as I and the other thing I would add in there is weight training. Didn't
Yeah.
do any in my whole career. Right? Like when I was in high school, I had the goal of benching 300 pounds, and my problem was I was successful at it. I
Okay.
got to bench 300 pounds like in like 6 months.
I'm done with that now.
Yeah, and I was like 190 pounds, right? So it was a good number.
Yeah.
And my only goal for it was because they had a list of the the gym wall. Oh, you can be on this 300-pound club, and I benched it, and then I'm like, oh, okay, that's it, and I stopped lifting. And then I think for my first ADCC, I wasn't training as much because I was at the power plant, but they did have a
Mhm.
weight gym, so I started lifting, and but after that, I just did all wrestling and jiu-jitsu. I didn't think of it as being important. I thought
Yeah.
like, I'll develop the muscles through wrestling and jiu-jitsu, right? Or MMA. I don't need to do this extra work. But now when I started, I think in my late 30s to lift weights and take it seriously. And I realized, I left so much on the table.
Mhm.
Why do you say that? Like, what do you think that weightlifting would have added to you, or what it adds to you now?
For one, strength, right? Like, yes, you can get strong by wrestling a lot, but I'm only moving a certain amount of weight, right? Like if I'm wrestling with other 190-pound guys, I'm only moving around 90 pounds at a particular angle and whatnot. When I'm doing a deadlift and I'm putting like 450 or something like that, I'm moving a lot more weight than I would ever be able to encounter in a wrestling match.
Mhm.
So I am going to develop strength that I wouldn't be able to get. And especially in like specialized motions, that um, maybe you don't get loaded that often, but you could use it more. So I feel that also for me, grip strength wise, like you can get some good amount of grip strength if you focus a lot on gripping, but if you supplement it with actual like grip exercises like sandbox turns, or I have, these captains of crush grippers here, like I have them at my desk so I can always crunch them and stuff. I just found like, oh, your grip game gets so much better. And it's so important. I also feel there is an element of understanding the technique of weightlifting that also translates into combat, right? For example, uh, I always tell people this when like you're doing an arm bar, right? If I am reaching far away from me to grab a wrist, I'm in a very weak position mechanically, right? Because I have the arm outstretched. Whereas when I get elbow deep and I'm here, my pulling muscles are fully engaged up close, right? So there's this relationship between pushing and pulling muscles. Pushing muscles are strongest when you're at extension. Pulling muscles are strongest when you're in full contraction here, right? And when you understand this, then you understand why framing works so well when you're framed out here, right? Because I'm pushing and I have a locked arm, and
Yeah.
he's trying to pull. I am at my strongest mechanically, he's at his weakest, right? And then vice versa, if I'm the guy pulling and they get tight with you, now I'm at my strongest, and the guy trying to frame is too close. He's weak, right? Um, so these type of things they register with me. I'm like, oh, like I can improve a lot of my motions in martial arts by understanding basic weightlifting mechanics. So, and like when I was younger, I always looked at weightlifting as kind of like running. Like it's like the medicine I don't want to take, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure it does good, but it doesn't. I enjoy it. As I got older, I treated weightlifting like a technique. Like,
Mm.
oh, there's fine techniques here. Like even with a bench, the amount that you're able to bridge, pinning your shoulders on the
There's a lot of
on the
technique to a
bench.
bench for
There's a
sure.
lot of technique to it, and all the motions, right?
Hmm.
So when I treated it like a technical sport versus just brute force, I enjoyed it a lot more. Right? And then I have tools now that I measure the velocity of the bar and all that, so I can track
Yeah.
myself. Like I know, okay, am I pushing faster and slower? Where is my bar path getting messed up? Like so I get some more enjoyment from that. But I feel that added strength, especially as a competitor, is huge, right? Because a lot of people say, "Oh, strength doesn't really matter that much in jiu-jitsu." I'm
It's
like,
a
if that's
lie.
true, why does everybody look like a fucking bodybuilder?
That's
Right?
right. That's a lie.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
and Gordon himself has said, like, he went from 180 pounds when he was still doing fantastic, and he's
Hmm.
up to like, I guess like 210,
230,
220, something like
240.
that.
Yeah.
It was a reason. Because yeah, you become a lot more effective when you got a lot more mass and strength to move
T-
people around. And I know because a lot of times I train with lighter people, and when I'm training with someone who's much weaker than me, I could do all sorts of silly things that I
Yeah.
could never do on somebody on my scale, you know? So I definitely feel from a strength and competitive standpoint, being strong helps. And I guess there's an argument too that if you're stronger, you're probably not going to get injured as often if you're not a knucklehead in the gym, right? And
Yeah.
you're trying to ego lift and you blow yourself out in the gym. And in my case, framing I try to keep myself with is that I'm lifting for health, right? I'm not lifting for numbers. So if I feel like I'm not doing well, I stop, right?
Hmm.
That's also why I like using those velocity meters because basically if you're losing 20% speed, you're starting to tank, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good time to like cut that lift.
Well, and knowing how your mind works, it doesn't surprise me that you have the velocity meters and that you dive deep into that stuff. Because I know we've talked about everything from jiu-jitsu, obviously, to like archery, and just kind of that's
Yes.
your mind. That's how you get into things.
Mhm.
Kind of going along with that when you're talking about the technical side of things and the way that your mind works towards things. One of your sort of your claim to fame, one of the things that you're really known for is your Kimura Trap System. That's the thing that you're really popular for and you're really good at. How did you go about developing that system and that style of techniques? Because I think a lot of people in jiu-jitsu, especially newer people, they all want to know, like, because everybody eventually develops a style. You hope that most people do anyway, and so everybody wants to know, like, well, how do you develop a style? How do you develop these things? And I think everybody has different approaches. I would be interested to hear, what is your approach and how did you develop the Kimura system that you use?
So it was a response to a few events. One of them, when Masvidal was still training with us, we were going to Bodog, and there was this one character there that was just unrelenting with the submission game. His name was Rodrigo Dam. He
Okay.
fought, I think,
Oh yeah,
in
yeah, I
Brazilian
remember him.
toughs, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Really good jiu-jitsu guy. But in particular, I saw him catching everybody with his Kimura to armbar sequence, right? And he would just Kimura, armbar. And I'm like, man, it's almost like a cheat code because he was just making it look very easy. So when I got home, I started practicing that sequence. And then I did, okay, Kimura armbar, Kimura to the back. And then I'm like, okay, what else can I do with this? And the way I am usually is when I learn something, I become obsessive over it and I try to
Mhm.
find all the possibilities to it, right?
Mm.
And it was around that same time I had finished my ADCC 2007 run, and I won my first match, lost my second, and then absolute I won my first, lost my second, and in 4 matches I had 70 minutes of time. So I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 overtimes.
Mm.
So at that time, 2007, I consider myself looking back as a brute, right?
Mhm.
I was a conditioning machine. I would beat people, and that my strategy was mainly attrition, guard passing. I'm going to score. I'm going to beat you. I'm going to put a pace that you're not going to keep. Very similar to my wrestling. And every so often, I'll throw in a leg lock, if I see it there. But in that ADCC, again, 4 matches, no submissions, just lots of overtimes. And I realized, like, I'm not going to win this thing if I just try to win by points. So I was looking like, who are the best guys here? Roger Gracie submitted everybody. Marcelo Garcia submits almost everybody he encounters, right? Like the winners who are submitting people. I'm like, well, it makes sense. It's a tournament format. If I spend less time in the mats, I'm going to be fresher than my opponents, and I'm going to have better chances. And this particular rule set really favors taking the back, right? So I'm like, you know what? I need to develop like I did in wrestling. Like in wrestling, I had game plans. I had game plan A, game plan B, game plan C, right? Depending on the situation. Like I need this for jiu-jitsu, but for a submission game plan because I need to be able to have a submission that I can rely on, right? And that I have very full confidence in.
Mhm.
So I made a little flow chart of all the submissions I knew. I'm like, okay, which submission could be used for the most positions, right? And Kimura was number one because Kimura can pretty much be done from everywhere. Armbar is number two in my book, right? And they're kind of very closely related for that reason. So I'm like, you know what? I was just already getting into this Kimura stuff. I'm like, let's go knee deep into it. And for the next, I don't know, it's like 3, 4 months, the only move I allowed myself to do is a Kimura.
Mm.
Nothing else. So every time I'm training, Kimura, Kimura, Kimura. And as I was doing that, I was discovering new things, like going to the head scissors, going to a side triangle, going to, inverted triangle. I could do it against a double leg, a single leg, a body lock, a back body lock. I could do it inside someone's close guard, right? And since I was playing a game, basically, I wasn't trying to win, I was trying to learn. And I was very stubborn. I would just follow everything through to its bitter conclusion. And I knew halfway in I was onto something because people in the gym started to complain. They were
That's how
like,
you know you're doing something right.
yeah, because like, oh man, all Dave does is a Kimura.
Yeah,
Yeah, but you can't stop it.
that's right.
And that's when I started understanding what mastery is. Right? When your opponents know what you're gonna do and you can still do it, that to me means you're on a master type level. Right?
Mhm.
Like everybody knows that Marcelo Garcia is going to try to arm drag you and take you back.
Mhm.
And you let him do that, he's going to get your back. Everybody knows that Khabib was going to take you down. Couldn't stop him, right? So these are people that have mastered their craft, at least a particular strategy, a particular technique set. They know they can get it. It doesn't matter. Like they can show you the game plan. You're not going to be able to
Mhm.
do anything about it, right? Because they have trained it better than you have, right? So that was my goal with the Kimura, right? Like I'm going to become a master at this, and I picked it purely by the ease that I can find it in, because I could be in any position and there's a Kimura there, right? So that to me is a solid move to have as your clinch move, right? I don't want to pick like flying omoplata. It's
Mhm.
a very limited use case. Right? I have to be standing, and I have to have some type of underhook or overhook to be able to get that to go, right? But if I have something like a Kimura, I can hit it from anywhere. So I know I'm dangerous at any point in the match, right? So that was my thinking process. And as far as the execution of it, it was just forcing myself to do it all the time.
Mhm.
I did the same thing when I wanted to learn half guard. Right? Back in 2000, I had a super fight. It was my first pro grappling super fight against Gordo, right?
Oh
Rafael
yeah, yeah,
Guerrera,
yeah.
who he is credited as the inventor of the modern half guard,
Mhm.
right? Before him, half guard was kind of an intermediate position to getting mounted, right? Like you
Yeah, it
didn't
was
go there
considered
because you
half
wanted to
pass.
go there. Yeah, like you just didn't want to get past,
Yeah.
right? And that was my experience with it. So when I grappled Gordo, uh, he swept me like 2 or 3 times, and he won with a last minute sweep. And afterwards, I'm like, okay, my brother filmed it. I just watched the tape, and I looked over and over. I'm like, oh, this is what he did here. This is what he did here. And then the next couple of months, I pulled half guard on everybody, and I just started doing the moves. And after a couple of months, I got pretty good at it. I'm like, okay, now I have this in my game, right? So I feel like one of the easiest ways to progress quickly is to specialize, right?
Mhm.
Find something you want to work on and just drill it, drill it, drill it, drill it, drill it. And I'm big on drilling, right? I think drilling is a great and safe way to build skill. I know, like my friend Kid Dale argues with me a lot about this, right? He's
Mhm.
big into uh, not drilling, right? He
He
hates
calls them like task-based kind of.
Which is
task-based games.
essentially, by the way, like in some cases, what you're doing, right? When you're doing your restriction on your rolling, you're basically giving yourself a game to play where you're saying, "This is the thing that I'm going after."
Yes,
But yeah, so
it's just I think it's just a wording issue more than anything, to be honest. Because the
Mhm.
drilling, I do agree in certain aspects. If I'm drilling a very robotic sequence,
sure,
you're not getting timing or speed,
yeah,
but that's rarely the way that my brother and I drilled. Like for ADCC preps, a lot of our stuff was drilling, right? Where I'd say most of the training was drilling
yeah,
because I feel one sparring, while it's fun, it's dangerous.
yeah,
Right? You could zig when I'm supposed to zag, and then I
Yeah.
blow my knee out. And drilling
especially
is
hard
very
sparring.
safe
Yeah,
because we know what's going to happen, right? Everything's orchestrated, but I can make small adjustments that are not that dangerous, right?
hmm
Like we would do sequences like, okay, I'm going to shoot a shot, he's going to sprawl, then I'm going to peek out, he's going to pull the guard, I'm going to go to a guard pass, he's going to retain, and then I'm going to jump into some submission, he escapes, we get back onto our feet. That's one
yeah,
rep, right? So it's not just like double, 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 right? Like it was more involved than that.
hmm
But I feel that drilling always has a place because it builds speed, power in a way that you can't really get if you're flow rolling around, right? Like,
hmm
and that's kind of like to me the weightlifting of jiu-jitsu or MMA or wrestling is the drilling, right? That's where you're going to build power and speed and clean up your technique. And the sparring element is more about it's the feedback loop, right? It's like all this drilling basically is to reinforce this concept of how this move is supposed to look like in your head. And then when we spar, we see what that looks like in real life.
hmm
And if that's good, then we're happy with it. If it's not, we have to go back into the beginning and drill a new iteration of what this move is supposed to look like.
hmm
So I feel like they all have a place, but I think a lot of people put too much time in the sparring because it's the funnest part. Right?
yeah,
I think one thing that you talk about drilling, you talked about the traditional drilling, like, just drilling a technique, but you're almost like talking about drilling a sequence, like like reactions and like, I'm going to do this. My opponent's going to react this way. I'm going to transition here. And it's almost like it's kind of like you said, like orchestrated. It's almost like an orchestrated dance in some ways. It's a sequence. You're both getting, like you said, you're getting a cardio aspect to it. You can increase the intensity. You can increase or adjust the resistance that your opponent applies or you apply. And then again, speed component, but then you're getting more not say realistic, but more accurate reactions. So you're kind of seeing where things may fall apart and you can focus on those areas. And then you have this idea, and then you go and you put in live sparring and you see if your idea or your hypothesis essentially is true or not.
Yes, I feel, and that's one of the things that people don't realize. When I was younger and I didn't know much, I would see like wrestling scrambles, and the word scramble in itself makes it seem like it's chaotic,
Mhm.
right? Like it's like, oh, it's just random motions going on, and whoever's faster wins. Like that's to the eye of the untrained. These are not scrambles, right? Like Ben Askren is not like just winging it. He knows what he's doing. He has a system. He understands like I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I mean, I'm speaking for him, but I'm pretty sure this is the case. He has an answer for every problem that could be presented during the quote unquote scramble, right? So if you want to be good at scrambling, it's not just be chaotic and hope it works out for the best. It's train those positions that to you might be chaotic right now because you don't know what to do, but learn the right things to do.
Yeah.
So when you get in there, what may appear to the untrained as chaos to you is an ordered symphony, right? And you're
Mm.
moving through it effortlessly. And for example, for me, that's what a Kimura trap is, right? Like someone shoots a single leg, I flip them out, they try to turn into me, I take the back, go into the arm bar. People are like, oh man, that was a crazy scramble. It's like, no, that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? That was basic. I know that, but you don't know that, and that's why to you it seemed like a random scramble.
Yeah.
But I feel like if you want to get good at scrambling, that type of drilling I'm talking about, that's what it develops. And like we were doing our drilling a lot based on the common situations that happen. In ADCC, it's about back exposures, right? Everybody's trying to get to that back, and because the turtle rule kind of incentivizes people to give their back, we have to try to capitalize on that. So we want to get, okay, I shoot, I got to work to take the back, or I pass a guy's guard and he goes to turtle. I got to get that first hook in, get my seatbelt grip, right? So like these are the type of things you want to work on. And I tell people, like, if you're having trouble in a particular situation or scramble, you should drill it out, right? And try to, or you might need to flow roll it first, like to try to figure out, like, how can I make this position work? Like, what if I fall this way? What if I fall that way?
Mhm.
Okay. No, then you figure out the best route and then drill it so you get speed at it. And now the next time you get into it, you're not going to fumble around. You're going to move precisely.
Yeah. Well, in what you're talking about too, what it also does, at least it's done this in my experience, is time slows down in those positions that are really fast. So if you think of like a quarterback, a quarterback who gets the ball, he then takes a step back, he might have maybe 3-5 seconds is really long, right? Like of coverage to where he can figure out where he wants to throw the ball. Now that's not very long. You or I are in that position, it's going to feel like a snap of our fingers and we're getting tackled. But to him, if he has like 5 seconds, he feels like he has minutes to sort of scan the place and look around and see what he wants to do.
Mhm.
And for all of us, when you begin to have this, when you're able to drill in a way and you're able to move in a way where you can essentially, it looks like chaos to the untrained eye, but to you, you know where everything's going on, and you can do this. You can practice in different ways. It slows things down so that during those moments of scrambling or during those moments of quick movement where you're having to respond, it's a lot slower to your perception than it would be to the average person. Where you can even think about, if any of you guys listening, if you've been, when you first started training, a roll or a hard roll or a competition match was like a big blur. And then it was like someone got their hand raised, something happened, and you don't really remember what happened. Whereas the deeper and deeper you get into this, especially when you're in positions you've trained, it's like the amount of time that it seems like drags when you're in those intense scrambles and stuff like that. So I think, like I said, the drilling's been really useful to me in different ways. And it's given me what you're talking about, where you have this systematic approach where you're able to go from A to B to C, whatever. But it also, for me, it's given me this ability to where it's like, it's slowing things down, where even if I have to make a response that diverts off the path, I'm able to do so very intentionally, because I'm not in this chaotic mode. I'm like, well, I've already been here thousands of times. So now if I have to make an adjustment, I can do that, and I can do so intentionally.
That's a good point too. That metaphor with a quarterback, it is interesting. You're right, because like, those moments definitely seem longer. I feel like when you have more control of the situation versus when you're just flying by the seat of your pants, it's just like you don't have enough time.
Right.
So, David, what about ADCC? You 2009, that was a third place finish for you. Tell me about that experience. That's a very tough thing to achieve and accomplish. For a lot of us, it's like this. We talk about football. It's like the Super Bowl of grappling. Talk about that experience. Kind of what was unique and special about you, so you had such a great performance.
Well, I would say probably that was like the peak of my career there, and that moment to me was very special for a few reasons. In 2007, I had mentioned I had grappled with. Oh, I didn't mention who I grappled, but my second match, I lost to Tarsus Humphreys in double overtime, and I actually had him locked in a Kimura. But at the time, I was just getting into it, and it was the first time I was going to try to use this Kimura trap in world class competition. and my confidence faltered a little bit. I felt like, I don't know, it's a little risky. Maybe just try to defend the shot traditionally. And the moment I let go of that Kimura, he got behind me and he got a rear naked choke locked in. I was fighting the choke. And the last thought I had was, how am I going to win this fight? Then I woke up staring at the ceiling.
Mm.
I was like, fuck. Right? And my takeaway from that moment was I gave up on myself before I gave the opponent the chance to give up. Right? That's what a submission is. Somebody's giving up. And I gave up on myself. I didn't have confidence in myself enough with that submission to write it out. So the promise I made to myself there was, when I lock on a Kimura, I'm not letting go. Doesn't matter what happens. It's 100%. So going into that ADCC in 2009, I knew he was going to be there along with all the other greats. And that was an interesting one because I was in Barcelona. The first two I did were kind of, in Long Beach, California, which was okay. And then the other one was in Newark, New Jersey, which is a weird place to have a world championship.
Yeah.
So 2009 felt special because I'm like, oh, we're actually going to be somewhere international for a world championship finally.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that brings problems as well because I bungled my weight cut. And I ended up taking 4 hours to make my weight. I was the last guy on the scale. And I had to do the whole wrestling headstand trick. I don't know if you heard that one, Chewy.
I remember guys used to do
I
it.
don't know what that is.
I didn't know that. I had never tested the efficacy of it, but I remember we would be doing that in high school and guys would be standing on their heads.
Yeah. And I always thought it was the stupidest thing ever. I'm like, how is that going to change your weight? Gravity is still working.
Yeah.
But when you're desperate, you do crazy things. And it seemed to work. I don't know. I can't explain it. Maybe it's just BS, but I know I checked my weight before the last weigh-in and I was like half a pound over.
Okay.
And I was like, all right. So when they were forcing us, like Lubo was there, he's like, you got to weigh in now or you're out. And I told my brother, give me 1 minute. And I go into the headstand and the head official is furious. He's like, just get on the scale. And I'm like, Marcos, how much more time do I have? And after I got off, I got on the scale and it was like 193.2, 0.3, 0.4. So I just stepped off the scale right there. I'm like, I'm good. It's 193.5. Right? But like, it was like floating up. It was very weird.
Yeah.
I don't understand how it worked, but it worked. So I made my weight there. And the first day of competition went like a dream, right? Like I was able to get my first opponent, Tron, got him in a heel hook within the first 3 minutes. And that was my first submission at ADCC. Right? All my other wins were just decisions. And then my second match was the match I wanted, which was a rematch against Tarsus.
Mm-hmm.
And what's funny was that match almost started in the same exact situation that I gave up on last time, which he shot a single leg, I got the Kimura, and I'm like, okay, this is it. It got a little funky because we rolled out of bounds, and he didn't seem too versed in defending it, so he was making like weird moves. But ultimately, I got to finish him with the whole sequence, which is getting to the arm, one arm choke, finishing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was such a great feeling because it wasn't just that I beat this guy, it was that I proved something to myself. Right?
Yeah.
Like I showed like having confidence pays off, right? Like you have to give your all into the move as well, right? You have to believe in the move. So I hadn't won the first two matches before that. So I thought the third match was that same day. And I was so psyched, right? Because I'm like, that was also a quick match. I think it was like 3.5 minutes or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I'm way under time, like that compared to previous competitions. And I felt very fresh. And I saw Andre had a hellish match with Chris Weidman. He survived the overtime just by the skin of his teeth. I'm like, I'm going to destroy this guy, right? Because Andre is going to be my next match. And then they're like, oh, no, yeah, that's it for the day. I'm like, oh, really? Let's do this now.
Yeah.
I know I would kill him right now. And but I felt like the nerves and anxiety got me in at night because I didn't sleep at all that night. I was so riled up, and I don't know.
Probably so pumped.
Yeah, I was super pumped.
Yeah,
right? I felt my dreams in my grasp, and but I think some of the effects of the weight cut might have kicked in as well.
Sure.
Or just anxiety. I don't know. But my heart rate was probably around 120 all night long.
Oh wow.
Wow,
I
that's
felt
a
my
lot.
heart out of my chest. Like, dum, 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 dum.
Definitely some
And
anxiety, excitement going on there.
yeah, a mix of things. But I know I was just staring at the ceiling. I'm like, good God, man, just calm down. And when I saw the sun come out, I'm like, well, I guess this is it, right? Um, so I didn't feel as great that day as I did day one,
Mhm.
but the match with Andre went pretty well for me. He pulled guard. I had a near submission with a straight ankle lock heel hook, and then I made a mistake, which again, weight cut fault in the sense that I missed a rules meeting, and they changed the rules that year that I didn't know about, which was previously in ADCC, if I went for a submission from the top and then ended up on my back, it would be considered a sweep,
Mhm.
right? And they changed the rules where now if you went for a submission from the top and then ended up on your back, as long as you initiated, it was no points. So that played a factor because I went for the submission from top, and then when I realized I wasn't going to get it, I decided to stand up because I didn't want to give him top position. When I stood up, he was able to take me down off because he had a single leg basically,
Mhm.
and then they got to two, and that's how way I lost. I lost from that too.
Mm.
After that, I kind of framed my way out. I went for a sweep. He stood up. He shot in. I hit him with a Kimura trap, flipped him out, almost had him in an arm bar. He curled in, and then he just got really tight. And just I think the nerves, I kept trying to do the same move, which I was trying to sweep him because at one point I had him on his head and he like teetered all the way like this, and then he fell back down this way. I'm like,
Mm.
damn it. I was like, that sweep would have been it. And I just got stuck instead of transitioning to other moves. I could have switched to the armbar, I could have switched to the back take, but I was just like singularly focused on trying to score that sweep because I was so
Yeah.
close to it. And I ended up losing that one 2-0. And then my consolation match for third was against Ravel Lovato. And that was also a rematch. I had beaten him previously, but back in 2007, in one of the longest grappling matches in history, which is a 58-minute match.
Mm.
And that was not a fun match, but I got the W on that one. So, but there is an asterisk on that one, which was he was hurt going into it.
Yeah.
He got Estima locked by Estima.
Yeah, right.
And he had come in with his ankle wrapped up. And
They went after that ankle.
I went right after the ankle.
I mean, it's competition. What do you got to do it.
Yeah, and he tapped right away. I didn't really have to rip it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I won, but I mean, whatever.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
It's not the way that you would like to win, but at the same time, you don't like as a competitor, you don't control the circumstances. You just you have to play the best hand that you have given the circumstances that are in front of you.
Yeah, so I mean I mean for me that was my best run. 3 submissions, 4 matches. I almost had a fourth one.
Mhm.
And I remember feeling pretty happy with myself. Like, you know what, this is good progress. I went from not placing to getting third and being, really close against Andre. And I was exhausted though. At that point, I'm like, oh, I'm good. And my brother had always signed me up for the absolute, and I always got in. Right. So my brother goes, okay, we got you in the absolute. I'm like, oh, damn it. I really didn't want to do it this time. I'm pretty beat up. And then I'm like, okay, who are they going to match me up with? Oh, Cyborg. Other man. Like they always give me some juggernaut. I had
big
Zanjin,
giant
the
heavyweight
one before.
who,
I had Jacare before, So I'm like, all right. And I'm like, man, but Cyborg's in my hometown.
Mhm.
Right? He's in Miami also. Like, I can't lose to a guy in my town. Right? And my brother's like, look, I know you've been going submission heavy. This one, play it traditional, right? He's a big dude, very flexible. I think it's going to be hard to just score the sub. Just try to beat him on points. I'm like, all right. And that was a tough match. I won in overtime by referee decision. Honestly, a toss-up. They could have given it to him, and I could see it also. I scored a takedown. He got a guard pass. Oh, he got a back take, I think. But then he kind of stalled a little bit. So I ended up getting the W, but what sucked about it was an overtime win. And they walked me from that mat right into my next match with Gunnar Nelson.
Gunnar Nelson, yeah.
and Gunnar was fresh.
Mm.
He only had one match on day one, and he went through Jeff Monson pretty easily. So I'm going to say this one just because I think it's a lesson for people as well, from mentally position yourself. When I started that match, I told myself, I'm not going to let this match go into overtime. I'm going to finish this in regulation. And I was true to my word. I lost. I didn't give myself specific details, which I should have said. I'm going to win this match in regulation.
There you go. There you
go. Because I went hard trying to submit him.
Yeah.
I got him. He shot a single. I got a nice guillotine. He rolled out. I rolled into a dog bar. He just squeaked himself out of it. But he was very feisty. I felt that was better than him, but I felt like he had so much more pep, right? And I was kind of dragging, you know? And there was maybe a minute left in the round, and he shot a bad shot. I sprawled it, and I just dove on a Kimura. But like I look at it, I'm like, oh God, that was a terrible. Like I could tell the fatigue had set in. I just totally botched it. And then I made the mistake because I forgot, it's going to be a guard pull. And my brother's like, oh, the minus point. So I rolled away from him, but like very slow. Instantly got behind my back with a rear naked choke. I was like, I'm not going to go to sleep on this one. Like not again. And it was locked in 100%. So I tapped. I'm like, God damn it. Right. And I thought to myself, I should have been more careful. I could have went into overtime. Right. Like I didn't have to rush this, but I had given myself this goal. And I should have been a little bit more careful. But overall, fun experience. And again, for competing, that was one of the most memorable ones I've had. I proved a lot in it, and I felt like that was a good story for me as far as overcoming that submission anxiety. Like not being afraid to go for it. And then my next ADCC, I won my submission as well in the first round. Like now, I saw at that point, I became a submission guy, right? Now, I also saw myself more technical, right? I wasn't just brute forcing and spamming cardio to win, right? Now, I was outclassing people with technique. And to me, it was a lot more enjoyable to be able to do it that way. Nobody wants to be the decision guy in MMA. Right. You want to be the knockout or the submission dude, not the decision. So, I definitely got a lot more enjoyment out of it.
How were you able to not make time, but split your time effectively between coaching, training, running a gym, working? How did you do all that? Was there some ideas or some concepts that you utilized that helped you kind of not get so overwhelmed? Because most people would probably be overwhelmed at that point.
Because I wasn't really learned or smart at that point in my life. Mind you, I would have been like 17 and whatnot. I just knew I got so much confidence from wrestling that I felt I could do anything. Right. And to me, it was just a matter of get it done. Right. If this is something that needs to be done, it has to be done. It's not like, oh, how is it going to happen? It's going to happen. Like we're going to make this work. So with school, I only studied as much as I needed to. And I found ways studying for electrical engineering is not the easiest degree you can get. It's very math, science heavy. And learning how to deal with the formulas and love does take time. But I didn't have any free time activities, right? I wasn't, going to parties. I wasn't drinking. I've never been a guy who smokes drugs or anything like that. So none of that party lifestyle was there. I didn't have any other pastimes, right? So the only things I had in my life was my gym, training, and work. So I didn't care about watching TV or anything like that. So you have a lot more time than you think is what I'm trying to say. A lot of people underestimate the amount of time there is in a day. There's a lot of time that people waste. Oh, there's countless amounts of minutes that people waste. And you could just tell by getting on anyone's phone and look at how much screen time they have. Yeah. That's how much time you've wasted in this day, right? And even a guy who's like somewhat productive, you probably have 4 hours on there, right? And you're like, damn, Like it just by 10-minute intervals, you're just sucking up a lot of your time of your day. 4 hours, you can get a lot of work done. As far as like for studies, I have found, and I think in general, for intellectual activities, you have a time span of somewhere between 2 to 4 hours. That's about as much as you could put into a study session that I think will be productive. After that point, I feel like it's diminishing returns, right? So I've always blocked myself like that accordingly. Like when um, I would go to a class, then I would teach a class, and I usually studied. I did a lot of all-nighters back in the day, and that to me was also extra time. Like I don't need 12 hours of sleep. I'm not LeBron James, right? I just need like 4 hours, and I can run. So we would do a lot of all-nighters at the college, and I would usually do like 2 4-hour study blocks, right? I'm like, okay, I'm going to study for 4 hours, and then take like a 30-minute break, and then start again, or take an hour break, start again, right? Um, so I found that useful because a lot of times if you just try to brute force your way through an intellectual task, you're just wasting a lot of time. You're going to probably end up with a writer's block or whatever the case may be, and never be able to make any progress. For physical capabilities, I think 90 minutes to 2 hours is like the sweet spot. If you're exercising beyond 2 hours, you're running a marathon or something silly like that, right? Like I always laugh when people are like, oh, I'm in the gym 6 hours straight. I'm like, you're wasting a lot of fucking time. I tell you, like,
Yeah.
I don't think like because that means you're training either so light or you're just saying that, oh, I clocked in the gym at 11 and I left at 5.
Yeah, you were hanging out and chatting with people, and you sort of tallied that up as your training time.
Yes, exactly. And like
Yeah.
that's not the same. I'm talking about
Yeah.
actual productive time. How much
Mhm.
time did you actually put lifting weights or running or grappling or wrestling, MMA, whatever, right? So like I find that 90 minutes to 2 hours, that's usually a good spot between the amount of intensity that you have to make it a productive practice. Um, and sometimes they're less. Like I've done a lot of practices that were just 60 minutes,
Mhm.
but it's like 60 minutes drilling on the clock. That's tiring as hell. If you're
Yeah.
doing wrestling
Mhm.
drills for 60 minutes straight, you're spent, you know?
Mhm.
Um, so I'm always skeptical about people that are like, oh, I put in 8 hours a day. I'm like, I don't know what the hell you're doing, man. Like,
Yeah.
then again, I've never messed around with any PEDs or anything like that. So I don't know the superpowers that those might endow.
Mhm.
Uh, but I've always been natural, very cavemanish. I don't even like taking Advil or anything like that. Like I have to get forced to put down Advil. I just deal with pain.
I mean,
Oh,
but even
that
then,
reminds me. Well, one of you were, I think Eugene, you were asking about recovery. Or no, Chewy, you were asking about recovery, or like what would I have done differently as a
differently,
younger
yeah,
guy?
yeah.
Recovery. I didn't do massages until I was like 35, right? And then like I did my first like sports massage. I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing.
Mhm.
I'm like, I could have been doing this for like my whole career. Like, whoops, like, I missed
Yep.
that one. The saunas, the ice baths. I have all this stuff at my house now. But it's like, man, like I'm. It seems kind of wasted at this point in my life. Like I'm not really competing anymore. But like,
Yeah.
that would have been a thing too. I always thought that type of stuff was weak. Like, I'd see like I have a guy go, oh, I gotta go, and get a massage. I'm like, what are you, a woman? Like, oh, what? Why are you getting a massage? Like, what the hell are you doing? Right? Like, that's just feel good stuff. I didn't think it had a merit, right? I thought it was just like being pampered.
Mhm.
Huh? Um, so yeah, that would definitely be something I would have changed. I think
Mm.
it's very important to be able to engage in that recovery.
Yeah, especially when you're older and your body does, like you said, can't take the bumps and bruises, and you can't train, even though your intensity is not, for competition. You still, if you're on the mats in some capacity on, most days of the week, you realize how important it is, because I mean your body just it doesn't want to perform this. You don't have as much horsepower essentially, and you got to try to squeeze out as much as you can out of yourself. I think when you get older, especially you've trained since you were 17 or 18 years old, right? So I mean, you got a lot of years on the mats. It's a lot of time, a lot of mileage.
It's a lot of mileage. A lot of people ask about like how come some people's careers can go longer and others go shorter. And it's like you said, there's different varying levels of mileage.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I felt like I put a lot of my odometer early in, and I wasn't changing the oil, wasn't
Mhm.
rotating the tires.
Yeah.
I was walking around with no ACL for like 5, 6 years. I think my last 2 ADCCs, and I never even addressed it. I just thought my knee was sore. No, no, it's just it wasn't there. Like, and explained also why my wrestling declined. Yeah, because I had no ACL, I couldn't balance right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that knucklehead approach, but you are correct. Like the older you get, your training volume has to diminish, and I think that's the other learning lesson as well that I would pass on to people. This idea that you're going to train the same way your whole life, or that you model the ideal training state being how you trained in your 20s or your teens, is outlandish because you don't have the recovery capacity that you did then. So,
Right.
of course, when you're high school, college wrestler, they can put you 6-hour practices daily, and you can show up every day like that, grinding. But you had the recovery ability to do so. But once you start entering your 30s, yeah, you can't recover from that. You're not going to be able to, you know. And I felt that started taking from me as well because I kept thinking I was weak. How come I'm not able to push
Yeah.
these
What's wrong
practices
with you?
that I was able to breeze through? Guys, so I tell people now, my hardest practices were when I was a teenager. And that's the way it should have been. Because those are the ones that you could take, right? Like if you're in your late 30s, you can't do an 18-year-old's practice. You're gonna fall apart after a couple days.
Yeah.
You know, trust me, I've tried. I went to Danaher's in New Wave, and I was supposed to be there for a week, and I tried to do all their practices, which my God, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Right, like they had a beginner class they did, and at the Henzo Gracie, Texas, Austin there. And then afterwards, they had the pro training from like 12 to 2, and then they had like another training from like 5 to 7, 6 or something like that. And like after 2 days, I could barely move. I was like, no, I made a mistake. This is not a older man's game, you know?
That's right.
So you have to, but that doesn't mean that you can't train optimally. Like, I feel like it's like in weightlifting. And this is another thing I appreciate about weightlifting. Like they have graphs where they show like your MRV, right? Your maximum recoverable volume. And they understand that, as you get stronger, your recoverable time gets less, right? Because basically you have to lift so much harder to get a reaction that the recovery is going to take you longer, right?
Right.
So the beginners recover quicker than the more experienced guys, right? And that also goes with age, and with sleep and all these other factors. So when I saw that, I'm like, oh, this applies to every sport, right? And I realize now, like, I'm, in martial arts, I am older, I am very experienced, and when I do train, and I like to train hard, that means it's going to take me that much longer to be able to bounce back.
Right.
So there's got to be training sessions which we're taking it easy, and then there's training sessions that we try to push the throttle a little bit more. But yeah, it's definitely frustrating. It's kind of cruel when you're at your technical peak, but you're physically not capable of having the horsepower you would need to perform the way you would want to.
Yep. Yeah. I think, and it's something I think, it's something we all run into because I've had the same experiences when you were talking about it. I was like, yeah, I remember when I started getting into my my mid 30s, that's where I really noticed it the most. It was like, I remember like going like, what's wrong with me? I remember like there was one tournament I actually went into and I won the match and got done and I got off the mat and I felt like I had like a burning in my lung, like, like where you had like a really good workout. And like, I hadn't felt that like for a long time. I was like, what is wrong with me? Like am I getting sick or something? And then I noticed that afterwards, like, like when I really, really pushed it, especially during like takedown battles and stuff, my body, what I was used to my pace being in my 20s and even my early 30s, I was now losing that pace a little bit. And then my recovery time, like you said, I had to take more time for recovery. I had to take more days for recovery sometimes because sometimes I wouldn't be recovered as much as I thought I was, especially after a hard training session, or I couldn't train as hard as often. I mean, I think it just, another thing from lifting, from jiu-jitsu, these things, you get really in tune with your body. And you have to learn how to listen to it. Like if you're doing a repetition of a movement, you got to be really in tune with the way that your body's placed and all the sensations that are going on. When you're doing jiu-jitsu, your body's constantly giving you signals about how you feel, whatever. And you got to learn to read those. And part of it is to like know when to back off, know when to come back and do all those things, because you can get yourself into a real problem and really get into as far as injuries and stuff go pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was just talking about this on my site here, which is that it's hard if you were a guy that was a quote unquote tough guy to dial back.
Yeah.
There's always that voice in your head, at least in my head, don't be a pussy.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, 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 you're the devil on my shoulder right now
Mhm.
because you're gonna get me hurt, you know? So I feel like that is something that I've learned to listen to more and more, but it's a challenge. So I think a lot of times, especially with the guys who were competitors or very intense, as you get older, that reality has to set in where like you're not gonna get away with ignoring that voice in your head that's telling you, hey, like you said, the signal, right? Because it's like, look, this is hurting right now.
Mhm.
Chances are it's gonna hurt more if you keep goofing off.
I want to say thank you for spending a good amount of time with us and sharing a lot of your knowledge with us. It's very you have been like, you've competed against some like the greats. I mean, you're up there. You're an OG as well, but you've competed with some of like, I mean, just the names, like the people you've competed against, went toe to toe with, is so impressive. So you're one of the elite grapplers, and I appreciate you spending some time telling us kind of what your journey was like. And if people want to learn from you or kind of see what you're up to, where can they do that?
Yeah, they could go to davidmma.com. That's my new site. It's a membership-based site there. You can join for free. And I upload every day into that website. And it's a relatively new. I think I started it last year around October.
Mhm.
But we already have like 290 videos in there. There's like 30 courses in there. So uh, that's the best way to find me there. I'm on all the different social medias, just on David Avellan as well, my full name. If you wanted to train with me in person, I live in Las Vegas now. Usually you can find me at Extreme Couture. Otherwise, if you want to see my gym in Miami, that's freestylefightingacademy.com.
Cool.
And it's a pleasure being here, guys. It's kind of cool seeing you, Chewy. I remember bumping into you in Derby City MMA back, like, was that 2008? I think.
2009. It was before you went out for your run. You
Yeah.
popped in, and I was teaching a beginner's class, and
Did you know who he was?
no, well, he looked really familiar, because you got to remember, this is pre-social media stuff. Like, you know what I mean? He just wasn't out there like this. But we're looking at him, and like you're kind of like, I feel like I've seen the guy. And I come up to him like, hey man, what's your name? He goes, oh, my name's David. And now there's no like, it's not like, hey man, I'm whatever. He's just there. And so I was teaching a beginner's class, and he's going through it. And then my coach Colin comes over and says, bro, that's David Avellan, him and his brother Marcus, Freestyle Fighting Academy. And then he came over, and in fact, it was him. And then we had some training sessions while you were there in town with your I think your fiance or girlfriend at the time or something.
Yeah. So those are good times.
Yeah.
I'm happy to see that you've done so well for yourself too, Joey.
Well, I appreciate it, man. I was glad to have you on, because we caught up at the last trials, and I think every time we run into each other, we end up chatting for a little bit, and I always enjoy the conversations and enjoy your approach to things. You have a very like sort of analytical thought process, and I think it's how your brain works, which is different than mine, and so I enjoy it. Because it gives me a different sort of perspective on things, and so I wanted to have you on the podcast, and I was glad we were able to make it happen.
Nice. Yeah. I don't know if you're going to be at this ADCC or CGI. I'll be at
I'll
both of them.
be at the ADCC this year. I've got one guy that's going to be going, so I'll be there.
Nice, cool. Yeah, I'm gonna be at both events, so I'm gonna try to Iron Man that Saturday.
It's going to be what do you, I mean, God, what do you think about that? It's going to be a crazy weekend. I mean, just going to be so much grappling packed into it.
Yeah, it's very interesting that Craig decided to kind of, one up ADCC in the way that he did. I felt
Yeah.
like he could have accomplished the same thing doing it a weekend prior or whatnot, but um, I think it's great for the athletes as long as he's able to sustain it, right?
Yeah.
Because he's already put pressure on ADCC to give now show money, which
Yeah.
they've never done before.
That's cool.
So like now ADCC is giving everyone $2,500 just for competing, which is the first, and that probably would have not happened without Craig Jones putting the pressure he did, and the fact that he was able to like take 37 competitors out of ADCC it says a lot as far as like, well, where the athletes are fighting for, you know, like the idea that athletes only compete for the prestige, you know, it's like, well, no, there's bills to pay too, you know, and
Right.
$1 billion
Hey,
for these guys probably goes a long way. So,
well, like
um,
10K for the show and then 1 million for the win, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
10K to show, million to win, you know, on a 16-man bracket is uh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm excited to see both of those events. I want them both to knock it out of the park. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like the more competition, the better, right? And obviously, it's already raised pace, right? And they're both raising attention to each other, whether they like it or not. So, uh, I feel like the fans are going to win out of this. And despite the amount of athletes they've taken from each, or the CGI is taken from ADCC, the ADCC bracket is still stacked. You know?
Mhm.
And you look at that 77 kilo, you got Mika, Dante Leon, like, yeah, man, it doesn't look like it got that much easier if it did, you know?
No.
It's
No, I
still
mean,
a
because it's like there's
murderer's
so many guys typically
Yeah.
that they have to exclude because, I mean, they only can put so many good people in there. So you always have a few really, really tough guys waiting in the wings. And so, um, like you said, I think it's going to be interesting to see if he can continue it because that's a hell of like a starting point. But I think if you can make more tournaments spectator like these, where you could actually, you could actually fuel more pay because people would come out to watch them versus say, whereas most jiu-jitsu competitions for the most part are kind of like spectators don't come and watch them very much. It's either really
Right.
people that are into the sport or friends of people that are competing, whatever, but getting regular spectators out there because that's where the money is. If you're going to get them, if you're going to make this sustainable and be able to pay competitors in the long run.
Yes, and they have done enough to vary it a bit in ways I think it's gonna be interesting. Like the
Yeah.
whole pit idea, I think is wonderful. I've loved the idea of the pit because to me, and I have some personal beef, obviously, because I got torqued out of bounds when they called it out of bounds call, right? So I like the idea that there is no referee intervention in that regard. Like it just
Mm.
goes, right? Um, and I think it's more realistic because I haven't seen anybody that's ever fought in a playing field and hasn't ended up hitting a boundary, right?
Sure.
I mean, football, you know, we have like what 50 yards across or 75 yards, and you're still running out of bounds. Like it's just the way we are. We're gonna play to the out of bounds when we can.
Yeah.
I think for ADCC, that's to me like I love the tournament as far as what it's done for my career and the goals, but the rule set really needs to adapt to that. I feel like we see this in other tournaments as well, like who's number one or
Hmm.
IBGF, where you can just go out of bounds and not be penalized.
Right.
Right? So it's kind of incentivized if you're getting taken down, just allow yourself to get pushed out and restart in the middle. So if they're not going to do like wrestling, they give a point, for a push out, which I think would help a
Mm.
lot.
Yep.
A wall is the next best thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel there's certain things like the grappling world can revolve with rule sets. And I think one of the easiest one is a point push out.
Yeah.
So if you watch, like I watch lots of footage, I do breakdowns and stuff on my site, and I just see guys getting takedowns and running out of bounds all the
Hmm.
time.
Mhm.
And it's like for a fan, this just kills your enthusiasm. It's like, I, when we had like two of the best grapplers in the world, like I watched Nicholas Marigali and Kainan Duarte, uh, who's number one back in 2023.
Hmm.
And you got two of the best grapplers in the world, and 10 minutes of it is them on their feet running out of bounds.
Yeah.
It's like this is a waste of our time, right? Like if there was no out of bounds boundary, people would be getting taken down sooner, right? Or if they realized that they were going to lose a point if they got pushed out, what they're going to do, they're going to push in together more, and you can wrestle when people are pushing in.
Right. Because then you have that push into that momentum coming forward that can then be initiated for throws, takedowns, things like that.
Exactly. Like Olympic wrestling works because they have that role, and you're not allowed to back up, right? So like otherwise, if wrestlers could go out of bounds and not have to be physically engaged the entire time, it would look the same as grappling, right? Which is
Hmm.
going to be very boring, like people just like being very safe. But the pressure to move in is what makes it work and what makes wrestling very exciting.
Mhm.
I don't see why we couldn't mimic that in grappling as well.
Yeah. There's and it's, I think the one point about Craig, I feel like had to do the tournament overlapping or however, just because I don't know if it'd have the same impact, because it wouldn't make people choose. And I think you're making people choose. You're obviously putting pressure on them. And then, but you're right. And at this point, you can't go back either. Like, you've already offered this amount of money. You can't really go back. You can't offer less. So you're like putting a pretty big, so if you run the CJI again, you're going to have to offer at least that amount of money again. And I think it's a good thing if people come out, but people have to support it. I think Craig's doing what he can, obviously bringing more attention, running all the podcasts and stuff. But
that'll be the real question, right? Is if
100%.
People come out and support it. Cause I know a lot of times, like I've like watched like a Who's Number One YouTube podcast or a YouTube stream. And then at the end of it, they're like, hey, join us over on Flow to watch the thing. And everybody's like, it should be free. It should be free. And then they're like, hey, go over to this free stream here or something like that. And you see this in the jiu-jitsu community sometimes where they want people to be paid more money, but then they want everything free. You're like, that's not how this works. It's like, if you want the fighters to get paid more money, you need to vote with your dollars by going out into those competitions and supporting them. Or, if you're really that upset about it, instead of downloading a pirated version of their instructional, go buy the real deal and pay them money and support them.
Yep.
If that's how you really feel. Now, if you have no bones about it and you don't care, then that's okay. But there's a lot of people that I think, they will make these moral sort of, these virtue signals, right? Like, oh, they need to be paid more money, but then, in the same token, you'll see the jiu-jitsu community say everything should be free to them. And it's kind of a contradiction. It's like, we can vote for our dollars on something that we find worthwhile spending money for. And again, supporting fighters and paying for things that then support more fighters and create more opportunities for people, I think is a worthwhile thing. So for those of you guys that if you're all about the CJI, you should go to it. You should pay up and you should support it and be there to support the fighters and the whole thing so they can do it again.
Yep. Yes. I feel that's a big thing when I have friends that have a business, I want to pay them so that like a good friend supports your business, right? A good friend is like, oh, can you give me a hookup? Right? Like, at one point, don't give me tourist prices, right? But I want you to make money off of this, right? Don't rip me off, but make money because I want to support you, right?
Yeah.
It's not like, let me see how much I can exploit you because of our friendship.
Right.
That's kind of, pretty lame in my opinion, right? And like you said, you're being a fake friend or a fake supporter if you're saying that you want everybody to get paid, but you don't want to pay to watch it yourself, right? Like it's not gonna, like you said, it doesn't work that way, right? Someone's money has to go in there, and if you really truly want to support this thing, you have to put your money in there. So I feel like the Craig Jones model of putting it on YouTube for free, while it might get a lot of eyeballs. I mean, unless he's got to really leverage the sponsorship and all that to really make that free approach paid, right? Because I think a lot of people like to say that, oh, they're gonna dump on ADCC and they're gonna watch this for free, but they have bills to pay, like
you're making the kind of like, I think Craig's whole thing is like being anti ADCC. Essentially, you're trying to, it's gonna be paid for stream. We're gonna do free. We're gonna do like, it's like I'm a man of the people kind of thing. He's kind of like he's the guy that made his name off of being in second place. Essentially, he's like the best at being in second place, and I think his whole demeanor and his whole persona is from this kind of lighthearted. It's almost like there is a lot of seriousness in what he does, but it comes from like this lighthearted perspective, which is, I don't know, I think maybe it connects with people more in some way.
And his marketing approach, I think people admire that, right? Somebody who's carefree and it's just willing to throw everything to chance and whatnot. There's always something that's kind of aspirational about that in a way. But again, my hope is that it's sustainable. It's not just that he's just being like the Joker and just throwing everything up and just hoping it works out, because I feel if this falls on its face, it's kind of a disaster in a way, because then it's going to only reinforce the ADCC argument, which is like, look, you see, they try to throw all this money around to the athletes, but the sport isn't ready for that yet, And like in my mind, I want the athletes to get paid more, sure. So like you kind of have a commitment right now, like you got to do them right. You got to make sure that you market this thing right, you fill up the seats, and you monetize all the sponsorship and the views as you can, so that we can keep this thing going.
For sure. Yeah. For sure, Brian. Well, anyway, Dave, man, thank you for being here for us so long. I appreciate your time, bro. And again, it was good chatting with you, and hopefully I'll see you in a couple weeks in Las Vegas.
Yes, sir. And see you there, and good luck and good training to your athlete.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dave. Hope to see you
Thanks,
soon, bro.
brother. Nice talking to you.
All right, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. And again, hopefully you got something from it. Big thanks to our Patreon members. Just want to throw a thanks to them real quick. We have just a handful here. We got Chris H, Sean D, Derek B, Adam F, and Josh D. Maybe there's a better way to do that. I don't know, but I don't want to put your full names on blast, right? Because it's like we're me and Eugene here were born in the 1900s. And people that were born back then, we still sort of value at least a little bit of privacy.
Well, yeah. I think obviously there's more than one of a name, but
if you're a Patreon member, you probably know it's you.
Yeah.
And again, if you guys ever want to either get a question answered for the podcast from the Patreon, you can send it in, or even a shout out. We can throw it out there for you. If you guys want to put out your gym name or something like that, like if you're like, hey, I'm like from Gracie Baja, whatever in Houston. Throw it out there. We'll give you a shout out for being a Patreon member. And again, if you guys want to join the Patreon and get access to the content library that we have built up into it and all the other perks that we have with it, you can do so at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Now, earlier on the show, I was talking about the Olympic meme, right? So the one that I looked at basically had a South Korean woman and the Turkish guy. Both of them had silver medals. Now the South Korean woman, she's got all the eye stuff. She looks like she's like in sort of some steampunk anime.
Sure.
And then there's the Turkish guy who looks like he's some dude's dad who walked off the back porch and shot some ski. Right.
I wonder. Here's the thing: people may tell me this or not. I don't know. Is it the hand in the pocket? Is that a technique thing, or is that just what he does?
Here's my thoughts.
Okay, I'm just curious. I don't know.
So first off, when you're looking at that, the thing that I think number one is that there is no one way to do anything. That's the first thing to take away from it, right? When we talk about jiu-jitsu, do never get it twisted that there's more than one way to do things. Like we talked to Dave today, who loves drilling. There's some coaches that hate drilling, right? But guess what? There's lots of ways to get really good at this stuff. And there's not one way. It's about you finding the best way that works for you, right? And so with that said too, these two people both won, right? They both won silver medals. Right. They did something that accomplished something so few people will. Well, with that, they are world class at what they do. And whenever you get world class at something, nothing is accidental. You don't do anything by chance. It's very deliberate. Like the whole thing that they're doing, whether his hands in his pocket, it's all done purposely because you have to get so in tune with things, right? I mean, like even me, like when I was getting ready for when I was competing at the 2022 Worlds and when I won, nothing about my warm-up, nothing about my preparation, none of it was accidental. It was all planned, all done intentionally, right? Because I know what works best for me. And so I know how to do this. And when I compete, my stance, everything intentional. And so these people are world-class with you. Nothing's by accident. And so, this South Korean woman found that, these glasses and this whole thing, get up, helps me out. Okay. Whether it's a mental thing, whether it's an actual physical, whatever. The Turkish guys like this works for me. Right now, I think another thing maybe to consider is that inside of the complexity, a lot of times is a world of in simplicity of things. A lot of times is a world of complexity. For instance, a lot of you guys could watch me do a lot of the stuff that I do. You can watch my matches on YouTube or on Flow or whatever. And I have a relatively straightforward, simple game. Couple weird kind of things that I do, but for the most part, you can watch my game and be like, oh, I know what he's doing. But I can drown you in details about each one of those movements that I'm doing because there's so much to it, right? Like we were talking earlier, like these scrambles sometimes that look like they're just happening. That doesn't mean that they're just happening. There's a thought process to it. There's a way to train them. And so a lot of times when you're in those situations, that Turkish guy, sure, it looks like he's doing something very simple, but the sensitivity that he has with his whole body, the way his body's positioned just so an inch over here, the way his hand's being held, the way that he's aiming, everything is it's very dense with complexity, even if it's a very simplistic movement. Yeah. David Avellan's talking about Kimura's and arm bars, relatively simple, nothing crazy about it, but the level of detail and complexity that he has for those simple moves is very, deep. And so understanding that, I think that sometimes it's like complexity doesn't mean funky stuff. Complexity it can manifest in lots of different ways. And so to me, the lesson to that is that looking at that meme is there's more than one way to be successful. Yeah. And complexity can take different forms and add it in whenever you want or whenever it's necessary, but you don't have to chase trends or do what everybody else is doing in order to, have a complex game or to win. you know, opposed to saying, well, all this stuff is stupid, because it's not all stupid. You know, there's some stuff that works. And also to be careful sometimes with who you tend to follow. Cause I saw, like, there was one business guy I follow, you know, he has some good stuff periodically. And he basically had those two posts up, and it was like, you know, basically this crazy morning routine type stuff. And then it was like, just sell stuff, you know, and I'm like, well, this was the same guy who was talking about, you know, he had to wear 2 sets of headphones to block out all the noise. He had a room built in a closet, so he had no windows to distract him, and he would chew nicotine gum. And I mean, he had this whole elaborate process just to write.
Yeah.
Why can't you just write? Or then I remember there's like some fitness influencers whom I know for a fact are on exogenous testosterone, which I'm okay with. No problem. I have no problem, no bones about it. But they're like talking about all this stuff, and it was just like, just do this one thing. I'm like, yeah, but you also forgot you're on exogenous testosterone. That gives you that gives you a hell of a boost, right? Like, again, be honest about it. And so sometimes people try to make it out to be it's like this one simple thing. It's like, yeah, maybe sometimes it is, but there's a lot of complexity into everything that we do, especially even when you take Hodger Gracie. You don't think there's like a depth of complexity going into that one cross collar? Of course there is. You know, so again, that said, it's not too poo-poo on one side or the other. It's like, there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. So that's the lesson I took from that meme. And there's a lot to it, but nonetheless, that's that. So with that said, guys, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thanks to our sponsor, Charlotte's Web. If you guys want to check them out, go to their website at charlottesweb.com. Look through any of their products, find something you like. Again, I like CBD for the sort of impact that it has on what I feel like my recovery. As I get older and older, that seems to be more and more important to me is about being dialed into my recovery. So it's one of the supplements that I throw into the mix. You can get a discount if you go to the checkout at charlottesweb.com using the code Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order. If you guys want to get some cool gear or jiu-jitsu merch, go to epicrollbjj.com. Shorts, rash guards, gis, whatever you're looking for, epicrollbjj.com has got you covered. Jiu-Jitsu20 is the checkout code. That'll save you 20% off the checkout. Again, that's CHEWJITSU when I say these. And if you guys want to get my daily email, again, which goes into all sorts of different stuff, like today's email at the time of recording this, that's going out is basically sharing a bunch of different ideas that I've taken from Stoicism. I'm a big fan of the Stoic philosophy. I've got, you know, copies of Epictetus's work, Seneca's work, Marcus Aurelius' work, all dog-eared and written through, and sharing some different ideas from that and how it relates to jiu-jitsu. And again, if you guys want to get anything that I send through that, plus some discounts on products that I have and updates that I have on any events that I have going on, all that and more, go to my website, chewjitsu.net/join, JOIN, and you can get it there. And so, guys, with that said, thank you so much for being here on the podcast today. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next week.